Isang magandang umaga sa ating lahat. For this morning, I would like to discuss the carbohydrate metabolism under the advanced chemistry. Okay, so the learning objectives for this morning is all about, at the end of this section, you will be able to explain the process of glycolysis, describe the pathway of a pyruvate molecule through the Krebs cycle, explain the transport of electrons through the electron transport chain, describe the process of AT production through oxidative phosphorylation, and summarizes the process of gluconeogenesis. First, we have to define first what nutrition is. First, we have the definition, the basic definition for your nutrition is that nutrition is defined as the science of how the body utilizes food to meet requirements for development, growth, repair, and maintenance. Ano ba yung mga kailangan natin dito? These are biomolecules like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. So, in advanced topics in chemistry, we're only focusing on the metabolism or the nutrition that we're getting from carbohydrate, fats, and proteins. Okay, so for this morning, we're going to discuss the metabolism of carbohydrates. Okay, now, so the carbohydrates are organic molecules composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. The family of carbohydrates includes both simple and complex sugar. Glucose and fructose are examples of simple sugars, and starch and glycogen and cellulose are all examples of complex sugars. The complex sugars are also called polysaccharides and are made of multiple monosaccharide molecules. Polysaccharide serves as energy storage such as starch and glycogen, and as the structural components, for example, chitin in insects and cellulose in plants. We've also to classify carbohydrate based on the monosaccharides, the disaccharide, the oligosaccharides, and the polysaccharides. So, the monosaccharide, this is the basic unit of your carbohydrates. So, example for your monosaccharides are the erythrose, ribose, and glucose. The disaccharides are the sucrose and lactose. Oligosaccharides are maltodextrose, and the polysaccharides are the starch, the cellulose, the dextrin, and the dextran. So these are how we classify the carbohydrates. So what are the function of the carbohydrates? So these are the main source of energy in the body. Energy production from carbohydrates will be 4 kilocalories per gram or 16 kilojoules per gram. Its storage form of energy in the form of starch and glycogen. Excess carbohydrate is converted to fat. Kaya po kapag sumasobra po tayo ng pagkain, na sa pagkain na yung excess na pagkain natin ng carbohydrate will be converted into fat by the process of glycogenesis. Okay. Glycoproteins and glycolipids are components of cell membranes and receptors. Structural basis of many proteins, for example, cellulose of plant, exoskeletons of insects. Kaya po, ang cellulose natin cannot be hydrolyzed by a human enzyme. It cannot be able to hydrolyze into simple form. Hindi pwede po natin siyang gawing maging source of energy ang cellulose because of the bonding between two monosaccharide units, and that will be discussed later. What are the biomedical importance of glucose? Glucose is a major carbohydrate. As we have said, it is a major fuel of tissues. It is converted into other carbohydrates like glycogen for storage. It can be stored into your liver. So kaya the glycogen is the storage is the carbohydrate can be stored in your liver. Ribose in nucleic acid, galactose in lactose of milk. They form glycoproteins and proteoglycans rather. They are present in some lipoproteins, present in plasma membrane, glycocalyx. Glycoporine is a major integral membranes of glycoproteins of human erythrocytes. So these are the biomolecular importance of glucose. So let us discuss now the metabolism. During digestion, carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars or soluble sugar that can be transported across the intestinal wall into the circulatory system to be transported throughout the body. Carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth with the action of salivary amylase and on starches and ends with monosaccharide being absorbed across the epithelium of the small intestine. Once the absorbed monosaccharides are transported to the tissues, the process of cellular respiration begins. Okay? So, yun din natawag nating digestion wherein the complex biomolecules, like for instance, we have the polysaccharide, it can be converted into monosaccharide units. Okay. So, yun yung example natin. That is the start of on how we metabolize carbohydrate. Like for instance, kumain tayo ng starch kanina, di ba? Kumain tayo ng pandesal, kumain tayo ng kanin. Yung polysaccharide present in your starch, okay, in your starch na kinain can be converted into its simpler form. Okay, it is by an enzyme. In that case, kinain natin yan sa bibig natin, we're using salivary amylase, okay, or the thiolin na tinatawag sa ating that are protein present in your saliva, the conversion of the polysaccharide into its simple form. Okay, kaya nga yung ating polysaccharide na starch, pag kinain natin walang lasa, eventually once na nasa bibig natin at na-digest into your mouth, nagkakaroon ng lasa, eventually nagkakaroon ng medyo lasa na matamis because of its conversion of the polysaccharide into a simple one. Okay. Thousands of chemical reactions are taking place inside the cell in an organized, well or coordinated and purposeful manner. In this reaction are called the metabolism. So yun nga, the first part of the metabolism is your digestion. So there are three types of metabolic pathways: the catabolic pathways, the anabolic pathways, the ampibolic pathways, and the stages and phases of metabolism are the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary metabolism. Now, okay, so this is just a simple diagram wherein the food molecules na kinain natin, as I have said kanina, example natin is a polysaccharide starch. It can be converted into simple or the simple molecules. Okay, it can be transported via ampibolic pathway. Ampibolic pathway can be anabolic and catabolic. Okay, so sa anabolic, sabi natin, yung ating food molecules, for example natin, the protein, the carbohydrate, the lipids, the nucleic acid, and etc. can be converted into its simple molecule. Doon naman sa catabolic pathway, it can produce carbon dioxide and water. Okay. So what are the major pathways of carbohydrate metabolism? Actually, meron tayong 10. Okay? Major parts of the metabolism. We have the glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, the gluconeogenesis, glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, hexose monophosphate shunt, uronic acid pathway, galactose metabolism, fructose metabolism, and amino sugar metabolism. But in this morning, we're going to discuss three: the glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and gluconeogenesis. Okay, let us discuss now the glycolysis. The other term for glycolysis is your Embden-Meyerhof pathway or the EM pathway. So the definition is that glycolysis is defined as the sequence of reaction converting glucose or glycogen to pyruvate or lactate with the production of ATP, kasi yung ATP natin is an energy. So yun naman ang kailangan natin sa nutrition di ba? So the end product of every metabolism is always be ATP, and ATP is an energy. So Glucose in the body most readily available source of energy, as we have said. After digestive processes break polysaccharide down into monosaccharide. Okay, including glucose, the monosaccharides are transported across the wall of the small intestine and into the circulatory system. Pupunta na yun sa ating blood system, which transport them to the liver. In the liver, hepatocytes either pass the glucose or through the circulatory system or store excess glucose as glycogen. Kaya ang ating storage form of carbohydrate is always be glycogen in the liver. So kapag kailangan natin ng energy, so pwede tayong mabuhay ng isang linggo na walang pagkain ng carbohydrate because meron tayong storage form ng carbohydrate sa ating liver. It can be released kung kailangan na natin ng energy. Okay? So meron lang tayong amount na carbohydrate that be converted into glycogen. In excess, as I have said kanina, in excess, pag hindi na niya kayang i-convert into glycogen, it will be transformed into fat. Okay? So, yun na nga, dyan na tayo nagkakaroon ng mga adipose tissues. Nagkakaroon na tayo ng mga bilbil, nagkakaroon na tayo ng yung sinasabi natin, mga beer bellies na sinasabi. Okay? So, the cells in the body take up the circulating glucose in response to insulin and through series of reactions called glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis transfers some of the energy in glucose to ADP to form ATP. Okay, glycolysis begins with the phosphorylation of glucose by hexokinase. Ito na nga yun. Okay, by the hexokinase to form glucose 6-phosphate. This step uses 1 ATP, which is the donor of the phosphate group under the action of phosphofructokinase. Glucose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 6-phosphate at this point. A second ATP donates its phosphate group, forming fructose 1,6-biphosphate. The 6-carbon sugar is split to form 2 phosphorylated 3-carbon molecules, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Okay, which are both converted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. The glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is further phosphorylated with groups of donated by dihydrogen phosphate, okay, present in the cell to form the 3-carbon molecule. 1,3-biphosphate glycerate. The energy of this reaction comes from the oxidation or removal of electrons from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate in a series of reactions leading to pyruvate. The 2 phosphate groups are then transferred to 2 ADPs to form 2 ATPs. Thus, glycolysis uses 2 ATPs but generates 4 ATPs, yielding a net gain of 2 ATPs and 2 molecules of pyruvate. So, yan po ang ating reaction on that. In the presence of oxygen, pyruvate continues on to the Krebs cycle, also called the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic acid cycle of the TCA, where additional energy extracted and passed on. So, yun po yung reaction ng glycolysis. Okay, ito po ang molecular structure ng ating glycolysis structure. As I have made mention kanina, meron tayong production of use ng ATP into ADP. Okay, so nag-use up ng dalawang ATP to form ATP, and then nagpo-produce din naman tayo ng dalawang ATP do sa 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, as well as doon sa nagpo-produce tayo ng 2 ATP sa phosphoenol pyruvate. Since 4 yung na-produce natin, meron naman tayong na-use up, the net ATP produced per glycolysis is only 2 ATP. Okay po, sa glycolysis process. Okay, explain po natin yung ating energy production of glycolysis. So, ATP production is equal to ATP produced minus the ATP utilized. As I have said, in the absence of oxygen or anaerobic glycolysis, meron tayo dong na-produce na 4 na ATP. during the substrate level phosphorylation. Okay? So, ito yon yung reaction na to. But, nagkaroon tayo ng ATP, na-utilize natin ang dalawang ATP, kaya yung 4 ATP minus 2 ATP, ang net energy natin is 2 ATPs. From glucose to glucose, so conversion of glucose 6-phosphate from fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-biphosphate. Okay po. Okay. In the presence of oxygen or aerobic glycolysis, there is a net production of 4 ATP from the substrate level phosphorylation. Nakagamit po tayo na-utilize natin din ang dalawang ATP, kaya ito po ang net energy natin na na-produce from the aerobic glycolysis. When we say aerobic, meron dyang presence of oxygen. Doon sa anaerobic, absence of oxygen. Yan po yung production of ATP. So, doon pa lang sa ating process ng glycolysis, nagkakaroon na tayo ng production ng ATP. Doon sa, during the anaerobic, as we have said, meron tayong ATP. Okay, so pag sinabi natin daw anaerobic again, an oxygen is limited or absent. Okay, so paano nangyayari yon? So pyruvate enters an aerobic pathway. In this reaction, pyruvate can be converted into lactic acid. Okay, so in addition to generating an additional ATP, this pathway serves to keep the pyruvate conversion or concentration low to glycolysis continuous, and it oxidizes to NADH into NAD+. Okay, needed by glycolysis. In this reaction, lactic acid replaces oxygen as the final electron acceptor. Aerobic respiration occurs in most cells of the body when oxygen is limited or mitochondria are absent or non-functional. Okay, during the aerobic glycolysis, in the presence of oxygen, pyruvate can enter the Krebs cycle where additional energy is extracted as electrons are transferred from the pyruvate to the receptor NAD+, GTP, and FAD, with carbon dioxide being as a waste product. The NADH and PADH2 pass electrons to the electron transport chain, which uses the transferred energy to produce ATP. As the terminal step in the electron transport chain, oxygen in the terminal electron acceptor and creates water inside the mitochondria. Yan po ang nangyayari kung bakit tayo nagkakaroon ng production ng net energy, yung anaerobic at saka yung ating aerobic glycolysis. Okay, now, since nakaikot na tayo sa isang Krebs cycle, okay, sabi natin, sa isang glycolysis, sabi natin, sa isang glycolysis, lagi natin pinuproduce is always be a pyruvic acid. Okay, so doon sa ating, the end product of every glycolysis or anaerobic glycolysis should always be pyruvic acid. Okay, so now, papasok lang papasok lang sa Krebs cycle yung end product ng anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, remember that pyruvic acid can only be entering into the citric acid cycle. Okay, now, ano ba ang definition ng citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, the tricarboxylic acid or the TCA cycle? Yun yung mababasa natin sa ibang mga books. Essentially involves the oxidation of acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, kasi bakit oxidation of acetyl coenzyme A? Yung pyruvic acid natin should be converted first into acetyl coenzyme A to recognize ng citric acid cycle para makapasok siya sa citric acid cycle. Okay, acetyl coenzyme A to carbon dioxide and water. This cycle utilizes about 2/3 of total oxygen consumed by the body. Okay, so yan po So in every glucose na napoproduce natin, meron tayong dalawang pyruvic acid or pyruvate na nagpo-produce. Okay, kaya sa citric acid cycle, kung ilan yung na-produce na ATP doon, it should be multiplied by 2. Okay po, ano? It should be kasi po, ang glucose na 6 carbon atoms are binibreak into 2 para maging 2 pyruvic acid. So, kung meron tayong isang citric acid cycle, isa lang papasok na pyruvic acid, okay, and since dalawa yung na-produce mo, i-multiply mo siya by 2, kung ilan yon. Kaya sa isang glucose, pag pumasok ng citric acid cycle, i-multiply mo yung energy produced by 2. Okay, so let us first discuss the history. Okay, it is discovered by Hans Adolf Prost during the 1939 studies of oxygen consumption in pig and breast muscle. Location of the citric acid cycle is the mitochondrial matrix. Okay, napag-aralan nyo naman doon sa inyong early biology as well in your early science class that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, since we are talking about the production of energy, so dapat nasa mitochondrial matrix ang production ng energy in close proximity to the electronic transport chain. Okay, so yung electron transport chain kasi, yun yung nagpo-produce ng madaming energy. Okay, so pagkatapos kasi ng TCA, papasok na yun sa electron transport chain eh. It will be discussed later by your other classmates. Okay, so overview. 65 to 70% of the ATP is synthesized. Name TCA used because of the outset of the cycle tricarboxylic acid participation. So, paikot-ikot lang kasi siya. Okay? Pabalik-balik lang siya to form NADH, to form PADH2, to form carbon dioxide and ATP. Okay, paikot-ikot lang. As I have said, sa isang glucose, 2 pyruvate ang pumapasok sa isang citric acid cycle. Kaya dapat yung napoproduce nating energy should be multiplied by 2. Okay. So the pyruvate molecules generated during glycolysis are transported across the mitochondrial membrane into the inner mitochondrial matrix, where they are metabolized by enzyme in a pathway called the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is commonly called the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic acid or the TCA cycle. During the Krebs cycle, the high-energy molecule including ATP, NADH, and PADH2 are created. NADH2 and PADH2 then pass electrons through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria to generate more ATP molecules. But the electron transport chain will be discussed later. Doon tayo nagpo-produce ng at least 32 ATP. Kasi dito, ang buong cycle or ang isang buong cycle niya, nagpo-produce tayo ng 38 ATP. Okay, pero 38 ATP, doon sa electron chain transport natin, doon tayo nakaka-produce ng 32 ATPs. Yung 6, dyan lang tayo sa glycolysis at saka sa citric acid cycle. Kaya kung after ng citric acid cycle, papasok na yung electron transport chain. Okay, so it will be discussed later by your other classmate. So reaction of citric acid cycle. So number 1 is the formation of the citrate. Condensation of acetyl coenzyme A. As I have said, yung pyruvic acid kanina must be converted into acetyl coenzyme A kasi yung acetyl coenzyme A is the only molecule that can be recognized by your citric acid cycle. Okay, and oxaloacetate catalyzed by the citrate synthase. Yung citrate synthase nyo na yan is an enzyme. Okay, so magko-condense yung acetyl coenzyme A and oxaloacetate. Okay, so citrate is isomerized to isocitrate, aconitized by 2 steps. Okay, so formation of alpha ketoglutarate, enzyme isocitrate dehydrogenase. So, okay, so pag sinabi kasi nating citric acid cycle, is an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So lahat ng nakikita nyo na we have ASE are all enzyme. Enzyme are all biological catalysts. This is all needed by your system to convert your biomolecules into an energy. Hindi tayo pwedeng mag-convert ng isang biomolecule without an enzyme. An enzyme are catalysts which are protein by nature. So these are the reactions of the citric acid cycle. Okay, conversion. So addition of carbohydrates, addition of the carbon atoms. So pupudos ka ng 4 carbon atoms, 6 carbon atoms, and then conversion again ulit into condensation into acetyl coenzyme A, going back into the production of ATP. Okay, so yan po yung ating enzyme catalyzed reaction ng citric acid cycle. Yan po. There are 10 steps. Meron tayong 10 steps. So this is the schematic diagram. As I have said, yung inyong pyruvate are 3 carbon atom na dapat ma-convert into acetyl coenzyme A na 2 carbon atom. Yung acetyl coenzyme A together with oxaloacetate are enzymatically incorporated into form citrate after. So since yung 2 carbon atom ng acetyl coenzyme A dinagdagan natin ng oxaloacetate, magiging 4 carbon atoms. And then i-isomerize natin using again enzyme na sinabi natin kanina, it will become isocitrate. This is your stage number 3. Okay. So this isocitrate converted into alpha-ketoglutarate na naging 5 carbon atom. Sir, nasaan yung isang carbon atom? Ito 6 carbon atom. Yung isang carbon atom converts into carbon dioxide. Kaya pag umuutot ka, di ba? Lumalabas yung carbon dioxide. Okay. So naging 5 carbon atoms, and then mababawasan ulit yung isang carbon atom. Magpuproduce ka ulit ng carbon dioxide, wherein NADH plus converts into NAD plus into NADH plus. Okay. And then converts to 4 carbon atom into the succinyl coenzyme A, the 4 carbon atom. And then there is a production of and then the succinyl coenzyme A phosphorylated to form GDP. So diyan tayo nagpo-produce ng ATP. And then that 4 carbon atom and also phosphorylated into succinate na 4 carbon atom. Okay, so nagkakaroon tayo ng FAD to FADH2, and then conversion of the fumarate the succinate into the fumarate, that is 4 carbon atom, step number 7, and then production of NADH plus H plus will become, yung NAD plus, yun, into malate 4 carbon. And then, paulit-ulit lang siya. Pabalik. Kaya nga sinasabi natin na citric acid cycle yon. Okay. TCA cycle is strictly aerobic in contrast to glycolysis. So, ibig sabihin, aerobic, so meron tayong presence of oxygen. Total of 12 ATP are produced by 1 acetyl coenzyme A during the process of oxidation of acetyl coenzyme by citric acid cycle, 3 NADH plus and 1 FAD2. Base dun sa ating reaction kanina. Ito, 2 NAD, tapos isang FAD. So 3 NADH plus 1 PADH2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. At saka itong PADH2 production. So, this PADH2 and NADH2 is very important in your electron transport chain to produce more energy, to produce more ATP or the adenosine triphosphate. Okay. Oxidation of 3 NADH by electron transport chain coupled with oxidative phosphorylation results in 9 ATP, PADH2, and 2 ATP. 1 substrate level phosphorylation. Okay, now, we'll move on to the last topic, the gluconeogenesis. Okay, this is the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate compounds is known as the gluconeogenesis. So, ibig sabihin, makaka-come up tayo ng glucose sa hindi glucose. Hindi glucose molecule. For instance, protein, pwede natin ma-convert into glucose kasi nga ilang inire-recognize ng glycolysis, glucose. Yun yung tinatawag natin gluconeogenesis. Fat can be converted into glucose by the process of gluconeogenesis kasi nga hindi sila pwedeng maging energy kasi hindi po siya glucose Hindi po siya glucose. And the only thing na nare-recognize ng glycolysis to become energy is only a glucose. To convert that into the end product of pure glycolysis, again, kanina sabi natin is the pyruvic acid. Once na naging pyruvic acid, magiging acetyl coenzyme A, and the acetyl coenzyme A is the only molecule that can be recognized by the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. Yan po So, kailangan natin i-convert ang isang pagkain into glucose. Kaya nga, di ba, kapag wala na tayong pagkain, bakit tayo pumapayat? Because the fat na naka-stored sa ating adipose tissues converted into glucose. Nagamit na natin siya. Na-use up natin siya. Convert natin siya to the process of gluconeogenesis. Diba? So, yun po. This is a synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate compound is known as the gluconeogenesis. This is a major substrate, precursors, lactate, pyruvate, glycogenic amino acid, and propionate and glycerol. Takes place in liver. 1 kilogram of glucose is kidney matrix is 1/3, occurs in lysosol, and some produced in the mitochondria. Okay. So, yan po yung process ng gluconeogenesis. Okay. So, ito po yung reaction of gluconeogenesis. Glucose, okay, so yun yung natin. Okay? So, makakaproduce tayo ng energy from non-carbohydrate material. Okay? So, that ends my lecture for this morning. Okay, so I will be sending the questions later to be written and to be submitted in my email address. Thank you very much. Keep safe, everyone.